My worldview was shaped at a very young age, where I saw my father, who was a high court judge, dispense justice based on legal arguments brought before him by lawyers. I understood that an effective legal system was the foundation to a safe society where the rights of the vulnerable can be protected. The terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or if you like, gender equity and social inclusion, are universally accepted terms. What they promote is full participation of everybody, regardless of your physical attributes. So for instance, you see a human being. The first thing you will see is he male or female, black or white, old or young? And so those are the dimensions of diversity. And what we promote now is intersectionality, such that all the diversity dimensions are interconnected. The most prominent of these diversity dimensions is gender and persons with disability. Not far-fetched at all. For gender, we have the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which promotes gender equality, and Goal 10, reduced inequalities. So regardless of your physical or mental attributes or what defines you as a person, you should be able to have equal access. I'll bring it back home. For us in Nigeria, we have the Disability Prohibition Act, Discrimination Against Disability Prohibition Act. It's a 2018 act that advocates for awareness and advocacy for persons with disability, but also wants us to include them in our interventions. And so we had this year OECD Dark Inclusion Marker. For us in Nigeria, under Section 29 of that act, persons with disability should constitute at least 5% of an organization's workforce. I think that's a step in the right direction to see that these persons with disability are included in what we do. Let me deep dive a little bit now into gender. And I would look at it from an equality standpoint, where we advocate for equal access to opportunities of both men and women. And we know our situation, even in Nigeria and in Africa, is very peculiar because of the bane of masculinity, patriarchy that has been dominant for a long time for us. But at the global sphere, you will see women's movement gravitated from mere movement to core objectives of international, regional, and national governments. From 1979, where we had CEDAW, up until 1993, where we had the Vienna Convention, and 1995, where we had the Beijing Declaration. All these global conventions had one thing in common. They recognized the fact that women's rights are human rights. At the regional side, we had the Maputo Protocol. That was a landmark protocol established in 2003. It also provided for the full gamut of women's rights, particularly reproductive rights. Women have suffered violence in various forms, both in private and in public life. I'll look at it from a cultural perspective, also giving credence by legal provisions, that a man can hit his wife, provided it's for correctional purposes and there's no grievous bodily harm. This is well enshrined in Section 55 of our Penal Code, and it's operational in some of our northern states. Going to the southern part, there's a cultural norm in the Bechebe tribe of Cross River State that says for as low as 2,000 naira or 5,000 naira, a female child can be given to a man, the creditor now, in marriage, for raising children or giving birth to children. The creditor is not obligated to take care of this young girl. And in the event of her death, the man, the debtor now, the girl's family has to produce another female child. These are cultures still prevalent in today's age, not far away from us. And so you see, from physical, emotional abuse, the women continue to suffer. In the private life, we see a case in 2008, not very far, where Dr. Priya Amadi actually sued the Nigerian Immigration Service because they had demanded for letter of consent from her husband before issuing her international passport. Before the court of law, they contended that a woman was classed alongside a minor and she needed the authority of her husband to have international passport. He said this was to perpetuate the man's authority over his wife and not to cause unnecessary breakdown of law and order. The court, in its wisdom in that case, threw out the case, saying that such age-long provision had no place in the 21st century. Thanks to the court, because that victory for Dr. Priya Amadi may seem like a victory to just her, but a victory to one is a victory to all. The issues of rape, defilement, it's everywhere in our society, most prevalent of which was during the COVID lockdown, where the Nigerian Governors Forum had to declare a state of emergency on sexual abuse in Nigeria. Sadly so. Do names like Elizabeth Ochanya, a 13-year-old girl, or Vera Omozuwa, or Bamishe Ayanwole, do they ring a bell in your head? These were women, girls in fact, young ladies who had their lives caught in its prime because they were brutally raped. And they died due to complications of that rape. Very severe issues we're talking about, and we shouldn't take it lightly. From a social economic perspective, women contribute close to 80 to 90% in the agricultural sector, but yet they own less than 10% of the land. We know that land is value, it is access, again, it is status. So why do we deprive them? And there are academic authorities, legal authorities that give credence to this. I'll give you an instance. In Ogunkoya and Ogunkoya, the court held that a woman is a chattel that could be distributed and acquired in the event of the death of her husband. You're not even given the human dignity to own a property. Instead, you are a property itself that should be shared and acquired. Thankfully, the Supreme Court in 2014, in the case of Ukeje and Ukeje, held that regardless of the circumstances of the birth of a female child, she was entitled to own property. Why not? She should. These are some of the cases that give us courage in the state of hopelessness in our country. But it didn't end there. From a legislative perspective, we have the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015 that was enacted, recognizing the right of a married woman to own property in her own name and sue for the protection of that property. Look up sections 189 and 191 of the ACJA 2015. From a cultural perspective, let's take it back. The Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, also enacted in 2015, for the first time prohibited and criminalized any form of discrimination, not just against women, but against all vulnerable persons, including men. That for me was a step in the right direction. So things like harmful widowhood practices of shaving a woman's head when her husband dies, or making her walk stark naked in the community to prove her innocence, was not just prohibited but criminalized. Female genital mutilation, which is accounting for a number of deaths of our young people, is also now criminalized. But it's not Uhuru yet for us. A lot more still needs to be done. Have you ever thought of why the Gender Equal Opportunities Bill 2016, 2019, and 2022 were thrown out of the National Assembly? Again, these are ways that they've perpetuated the abuse against women by saying that their rights, resources, and representation doesn't come to limelight. Thankfully, in June this year, the House of Representatives actually took a stand. So the 74 special seats for women in the National Assembly, particularly the House of Rep, passed second reading. And that's kudos to the House of Representatives. They've also passed the sexual harassment bill, because even in the educational sphere, we see a lot of sextortion going on. We saw the BBC report of 2019, which revealed the naked abuse of power of lecturers against students, all in exchange for grades. These are very dire situations we're being faced with on a daily basis. The 5 gender bills seek nothing more than, first, that a woman, a Nigerian woman, married to a foreigner, by virtue of that marriage, the man could become a citizen. And there's a corresponding provision for men in the Constitution that Nigerian men married to foreign women could become citizens in Nigeria. So why is it not applicable to Nigerian women? Again, the second bill actually says that Nigerian women married to fellow Nigerian men from another state could have the indigenship of that man's state of origin. The last 3 are affirmative action bills, providing for 35% participation of women in political life, in ministerial and commissionership positions, as well as in the national and state houses of assembly. These are steps in the right direction, if only it could just pass through the necessary channels and become laws. We see there a picture of the few women representing us in the National Assembly. Regrettably, just 5% of women are representing us, which is less than 20 or 21 persons, female persons in the National Assembly, out of a whopping number of 469 or thereabout. That shows you the magnitude of what we are dealing with. And we continue to advocate. For instance, we want that our rights are respected, that there's resources for women to thrive, and that we have full representation where our voices can be heard. What can we do, all of us sitting here, yourself and myself? We can begin to change our biases and stereotypes, unconscious biases and stereotypes. At the family sphere, family as the smallest unit of a society has a huge role to play. For instance, how do we celebrate when we give birth to a male child versus how we give birth to a female child? When it's a boy, we usually say, mama, now full current. But if it's a girl, half current again. It happens. Do we tell the female children, go and learn makeup or catering or fashion designing while the boys are built for the very fancy positions? This is the quadrant of change, and it trickles down to the institutions. Do we put a cap in our institutions to say beyond this limit, a woman cannot aspire anymore to hold a higher position? We saw what happened in the Nigerian police force, where a female police officer was dismissed because she got pregnant out of wedlock, whereas there's no corresponding provision for male officers who put women in the family way. Let's bring it back home to our communities and begin to question and deconstruct those underlying root causes of violence and unequal power relations. To say no, there must be more access for women. And we are all here today as portals, gateways. Each and every one of us here has a role to play. Are you ready to play that role? The question is left for you. As we celebrate 16 days of activism, this framework, let's arrange the world with our thoughts, our words, and our actions to say no to violence, no to discrimination, and no to any form of oppression against women. And together, we can make a difference. Thank you.